Margaret Chen was 51 when she realized her life had quietly become something she never intended. Every morning followed the same script: coffee alone at the kitchen island, a glance at her silent phone, then hours maintaining a house that no longer felt like a home. Her husband Robert left before dawn and returned after dark, offering little more than tired questions about errands or bills. Their conversations had shrunk to the functional exchanges of roommates rather than the intimate sharing of partners who'd once promised each other everything. She could still remember when they'd laughed easily together, when weekend drives along the coast meant singing off-key and making up silly games. But those memories felt like they belonged to a different couple in a different lifetime. Their son, Daniel, had become her lifeline. At 24, he'd moved back to Boston after finishing photography school in New York, saving money while building his career. Margaret was proud of him, though she sometimes felt guilty for depending on his company more than a mother probably should. Part 1, the project begins. One afternoon, Daniel burst into the kitchen with his camera bag slung over his shoulder and excitement lighting up his face. "Mom, I'm starting a new photography series. I want to capture people rediscovering who they are." Margaret smiled while drying dishes. "That sounds wonderful, honey. You've always had such a gift for seeing people." He nodded, then said something that stopped her cold. "I want you to be my first subject." She froze, dish towel in hand. "Me." Daniel grinned. "Why not? You'd be perfect." She laughed nervously. "Oh, Daniel, I'm far too old for that. Find someone younger, someone more interesting." "That's exactly why I want to start with you," he said. "You've lived. That shows in your face, in your eyes. That's what makes someone worth photographing." Margaret didn't know how to respond. No one had spoken to her like that in years, as if she were someone worth seeing, someone who mattered beyond her roles as wife and mother. She tried to brush it off, but his words followed her through the rest of the day. That evening, catching her reflection in the kitchen window, she paused. The woman staring back looked tired, yes, but not entirely lost. Maybe there was still a spark of who she used to be. The next morning, Daniel asked again, "Come on, Mom, just one session." After a long pause, she smiled softly. "All right, just one." Daniel transformed their living room into a makeshift studio, setting up lights and a simple backdrop. Margaret felt awkward standing before the camera, unsure where to put her hands or how to arrange her face. "This feels ridiculous," she said, crossing her arms defensively. "Just breathe," Daniel said gently. "Don't pose, just be yourself." He adjusted the lights until they cast a warm, flattering glow. Then he put on music, an old jazz record she hadn't heard in years. The melody struck her heart immediately. It was the song she and Robert had danced to on their wedding night. Memories flooded back. The young woman she'd been, barefoot and laughing, believing love could conquer anything. She blinked hard, forcing a smile. "Hey," Daniel said softly. "You don't have to pretend, just look at me, be real." She looked up, meeting her son's kind eyes through the camera lens. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. The shutter clicked, again and again. Sometimes he'd say, "Turn your head slightly," or "Think of something that makes you happy." Slowly, she relaxed. Her laughter came naturally then, light and genuine. After a while, Daniel lowered the camera. "Want to see?" Margaret nodded nervously and walked over to his laptop. When she saw the images on his screen, she gasped. The woman in those photographs looked alive. Her smile reached her eyes. Yes, there were lines, evidence of time's passage, but she looked radiant, strong, human. "That can't be me," she whispered. Daniel smiled. "It's exactly you, you just forgot what you looked like." Part 2, being seen. That night, Margaret sat in bed scrolling through the photos Daniel had sent to her phone. She couldn't stop staring. She didn't see flaws anymore. She saw someone who had survived heartbreak, disappointment, loneliness, and was still standing. When Robert came home late, she wanted to share this small joy with him. "Look," she said hopefully, holding out her phone. "Daniel took some photographs of me today." He glanced briefly, nodded, and said, "Nice. Is there any dinner left?" Her smile faded. "Yes, in the kitchen." Robert went upstairs without another word. The silence that followed felt heavier than ever. Margaret stood there, phone in hand, wondering how she'd become so invisible in her own marriage. Later that night, she knocked softly on Daniel's door. "Thank you, sweetheart, for doing this." He looked up from his editing screen, eyes tired but warm. "You were amazing, Mom. You should see yourself the way everyone else does." "I'm starting to," she said quietly. Back in her room, she stood before the mirror. Same face, same lines, same tired eyes, but something had changed inside her. Daniel's photographs had shown her that beauty wasn't about youth or perfection. It was about still being able to feel, to be present, to be human. The next morning, she woke earlier than usual and watched the sunrise from the porch. For the first time in years, she felt calm. She didn't know what would happen with her marriage or her future, but she knew one thing: she was ready to be seen again. Part 3: The Truth Surfaces. Daniel's photography project gained attention quickly. What began as a personal series turned into something bigger when he shared the images online. People loved the honesty in his work: real faces, real emotions, real stories. But among all the portraits, Margaret stood out. There was something in her expression that resonated deeply. The photograph of her smiling softly in warm light began spreading across social media. Strangers left comments calling her graceful, strong, beautifully human. Margaret didn't know how to handle the attention at first, but every kind message made her feel more alive. She started dressing with more care, fixing her hair, going for walks again. Neighbors greeted her warmly, noticing the light that had returned to her eyes. But every time she looked at Robert, the distance between them felt wider. He never asked about the photographs, never complimented her, never seemed to notice that the world saw beauty in the woman he'd stopped seeing years ago. One evening, Robert mentioned another business trip. He didn't say where, just that he'd be gone for 2 days. Margaret nodded, pretending not to notice how quickly he packed or how often he smiled at his phone. That night, while tidying his office, she saw it, an email notification still on his computer screen. A woman's name she didn't recognize, Rachel. The subject line read, "Can't wait for next weekend." Her heart stopped. She stepped back, gripping the desk for support. She wanted to believe it was innocent, a colleague, a misunderstanding. But the unease she'd been ignoring for months suddenly made terrible sense. The next morning, while putting away laundry, she found a hotel receipt in Robert's jacket pocket. The name beside his, Rachel M. The date matched his last business trip. Margaret sat on the edge of their bed, holding the receipt with trembling hands. The house was quiet, that heavy silence that comes before something breaks. She didn't cry, not yet. Her heart was too full of anger, confusion, and a strange, bitter clarity. When Robert came downstairs that morning, adjusting his tie, he didn't notice her sitting at the kitchen table. "Morning," he said casually, pouring coffee. Margaret's voice was calm but cold. "Did you have a good time last weekend?" He froze. "What do you mean?" She placed the receipt on the table between them. "You left this in your jacket." For a long moment, neither spoke. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. Then Robert sighed and sank into a chair. "Margaret, please." "Just tell me the truth," she interrupted softly. He rubbed his forehead. "It's not what you think." Her eyes glistened. "Then tell me what it is." But when he didn't answer, she already knew. After a long silence, he whispered, "I'm sorry." Those 2 words broke something inside her, not because of their meaning, but because of how empty they sounded. She sat still for a moment, then stood up, her voice steady. "You didn't lose me because of her, Robert. You lost me long before that." Part 4: New Beginnings. Margaret stayed with her sister Caroline that night. Caroline listened quietly as Margaret told her everything. "You don't deserve this," Caroline said gently. "You've given him everything. Maybe it's time to give something to yourself." Margaret stared out the window, feeling both heartbroken and strangely light. For the first time in years, she didn't have to pretend everything was fine. A week later, Daniel's photography series was featured in a local art magazine. They invited him and Margaret to an opening event at a downtown gallery. Margaret almost didn't want to go, afraid of seeing her own face displayed for everyone to see. But Daniel insisted. "Mom, your story helped people. You have to come." That evening, she wore a soft blue dress and tied her hair loosely. When she arrived, people stopped to look at her, not with pity but with admiration. Her portrait hung in the center of the gallery, beautifully framed under warm lighting. The caption read, "A woman remembering herself." As she stood there, strangers approached her, saying how much her photograph had moved them. "You look like someone who survived storms," one woman said, smiling kindly. "But you're still standing." Margaret smiled back, "I suppose I am." Daniel watched from across the room, proud and emotional. Later, he came to her side and whispered, "See, Mom, you thought you were broken, but look, you're inspiring people." She looked at him, tears in her eyes. "You gave me back something I'd lost, myself." Epilogue, 6 months later. Margaret found a small apartment near the harbor. It wasn't large, but it was hers. She started painting again, something she hadn't done in decades. Bright colors returned to her life, not just on canvas but in her heart. Daniel visited often, helping her decorate. One evening, he surprised her with a framed print, the portrait that had started everything. "For your new home," he said. She hung it in her living room. The image captured everything she'd been through: pain, courage, rediscovery. Her story appeared online alongside Daniel's growing success as a photographer. People from around the country wrote messages of support. One stood out, "Thank you for reminding me it's never too late to start over." Margaret sat by her window that night, reading that line repeatedly. For years, she'd measured her worth by the love she gave others. Now she finally understood that her worth had always been her own. On her next birthday, Margaret and Daniel walked along the harbor where boats rocked gently in their slips. The sunset painted everything gold. Daniel turned to her and smiled. "You look happy, Mom." She nodded. "I am. For the first time in a very long time, I really am."